nomination for RT17. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please put your hands together and help me welcome on stage Mr. John Glendon, the Managing Director of Univonic Palm Oil PCL, to present his paper titled 4 Pillars of Sustainable Palm Oil Production in Thailand.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to RSPO for the invitation. And on behalf of all the growers in Thailand, I'd like to extend a welcome, albeit belatedly. I hope you all enjoy your stay in this wonderfully hospitable country. Our problem right now is we're running out of time, so I shall try to go through this very quickly. Please excuse me if I seem a bit rushed, and perhaps at times a bit superficial. Appropriately, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the first planting of oil palms in Thailand, and coincidentally also in Philippines. So it's a very good opportunity to see what has been achieved, what progress has been achieved in its past 50 years. What I would like to talk about briefly is about the progress over the past 50 years. Secondly, why has one country prospered, one industry prospered, and the other has not, with the social and environmental implications of that. The third point are the 4 pillars of sustainability in Thailand, which have contributed, which has been what I would say the growers' response to the right incentives. And finally, a summary and the key conclusions and our shared responsibility for the future. Now, I have approximately 12 minutes left to speak. That means I've got about 3 minutes on each of these topics, so it will be superficial. Okay, geographically, first of all, we start off that both Thailand and Philippines share a much in common. They both are of similar latitude, similar climate, in regions previously considered to be marginal for oil palms. As most of you know, oil palms grow best close to the equator and high rainfall areas, Sumatra, Peninsula Malaysia and Borneo. Southern Thailand and southern Philippines were always considered to be marginal. So when they started 50 years ago, besides the geographical and climatic similarities, they had many other similarities. Populations of the two countries were almost identical. Philippines economy was probably about 20% larger than Thailand's, and of course in GDP per capita, Filipinos were about 20% better off than Thais. This was partly reflected in their life expectancy in the two countries. And as I said, 50 years ago, there was no oil palms at all. What has happened since then, 50 years later? Since 1969, you can see on this chart the growth in Thailand to now more than 1 million hectares of oil palms, whereas Philippines has struggled to, at an optimistic estimate, have 89,000 hectares only. Thailand is now self-sufficient in palm oil, produces 2.8 million tonnes last year, maybe 3 million this year. As you can see, 45% of it goes into feeding the domestic market. An equal amount goes into a very innovative and pioneering biofuel scheme, and the balance is exported. On the other hand, in Philippines, it's more about consumption than production. This graph since the year 2000 shows that vegetable oil consumption has increased very rapidly from 400,000 tonnes in the year 2000 up to currently 1.4 million expected in 2019. Whereas coconut oil made up 85% of the consumption in 2000, this has dropped to only 12% in the year 2018. Imports of palm oil have risen to 1.2 million tonnes, and domestic palm oil production has failed to meet this growing demand. You see the asterisks there because I believe, and others agree with me, that these figures are underestimates. So why has Philippines' palm oil and oil palm industry failed to prosper? Now, there are many reasons for this, but I'll touch on what I think is the main one. The first one is the unintended consequences of agrarian land reform. In Philippines, each decade, they have had another attempt at land reform, starting off in 1988 with the Comprehensive Agrarian Land Reform Program known as CARP, followed up 10 years later, as you can see there, with the land reform law known as CAL, followed up another 10 years later with comprehensive agrarian reform with extension and reform known as CARPA. The objectives of CAL and CARPA were admirable, very objectives that we would all aspire to. You can see them here. I don't need to go through them all. Of course, it's the redistribution of wealth, creating equality for landowners, enhancing agricultural production, providing employment opportunities for more agricultural workers, etc., etc. I have to say, well, you can form your own opinion on how successful this has been. It's difficult to find an analysis, but searching the web, you find that in 2003, the United Nations, the ADB, and the European Union combined to do a study, and they discovered that the beneficiaries of CARP, CAL, and CARPA, their poverty declined from 47 to 45%. Amongst the non-participants, on the other hand, poverty increased from 55 to 56%. That's a long time ago. Since in 2013, the government, in 2013, the government had acquired 6.9 million hectares and distributed that land with a maximum of 3 to 5 hectares per individual or corporation. My conclusion, and the conclusion of others, is that well-intentioned agrarian land forms which restrict individual or corporate land ownership to maximum 5 hectares have stifled agricultural development. One of the unintended consequences of this sad situation can be seen in these pictures. The boys on the left, the children of, I describe them as the children of the exhausted logging industry in Agusan del Sur in Mindanao. The fathers, the grandfathers of these boys were chainsaw operators, bulldozer operators in the logging industry, which has gone. I asked my guide, actually my bodyguard, because it's a heartland of the NPA, New People's Army, Communist Army, what do these boys aspire to do? And he looked at me and he said, if they're lucky, they aspire to get a gun. That will be their future. It's a tragic situation. We look on the right here, these young ladies from the coast of Surigao, from a place called Bislig, which used to be the largest pulp and plywood factory in Asia, possibly in the world. 42,000 people were working there, massive place at Bislig. It is dead. It's like a ghost town. Nothing left. What sort of future do these girls have? Their forests have gone. And population pressure is ensuring that those forests will never return. I worked in Asia around the region for the past 40 years, and I've too often seen this depressing situation. If the people are lucky, oil palms will come to replace their lost forests. But these people, sadly, are unlucky, and oil palms are not, unlike across nearby in Sabah, where oil palms have replaced the depleted forest. Soaring populations and rural poverty are creating pressure on land and food resources. As we can see, the two countries 50 years ago in this study both had similar populations, between them about 70 million people. Well, now they've grown to about 170 million people. and that growth is not really slowing down. Should we wonder about the pressure on our environment? What else has happened over the past 50 years? Population, as I mentioned, it used to be 70 million, and we've just, as I've already mentioned, grown to 170 million. GDP, whereas Philippines used to be 20% more wealthy than Thailand, now Thailand is 40% more wealthy than Philippines. Similar, well, it's worse. And if you look at GDP per capita, approximately double in Thailand compared to Philippines. Similar trend in life expectancy. What you can say is that people in Thailand have been better at escaping poverty than in the Philippines, and we have to ask ourselves, what are the reasons for that? Of course, there's been a big change in palm oil as well, as we've already seen. I don't attribute the change in the economy to the palm oil, but it is a symptom of what has been going on. Coincidentally, I put at the bottom there, ease of doing business out of 170 countries. Thailand is 21st, Philippines is 95th. Philippines is absolutely bound up in restrictive social legislation, which is stifling the economy. Despite this alarming situation, some Philippines environmental and social NGOs persistently attack palm oil. Oil palms have a terrible name in the Philippines as a result of the activities of these people. I put just one, which you can see here. Despite this abundance, I'll read you, despite this abundance of troubling information, the demand for palm oil continues to defy logic. The underlining is mine. I don't think it defies logic at all. It's absolutely logical. So in summary, after 50 years of largely fruitless effort in the Philippines, the oil palm industry is struggling to produce barely 10% of the country's soaring edible oil requirements. In 2019, this will cost the Philippines approximately $1 billion to import palm, which could and should be produced by their own farmers. So why is it so different in Thailand? Very briefly, three key features of the industry in Thailand. The first one is that small farmers owning less than 8 hectares comprise more than 90% of the planted area of the 1 million hectares now. There are no large plantation companies as you would know them in Indonesia or Malaysia. Now more than 300,000 small farmers and their families are supported by oil palms. This is not including all the people who work in the plantation factories, refineries, etc. Smallholder farms are being converted, have been converted, and are being converted from existing agricultural crops. For example, from rubber, coconuts, cattle grazing, rice paddy, etc. There is no deforestation to plant oil palms in Thailand. It's like India. Some policies which have made a difference in Thailand. Less industry regulation. Notwithstanding the region's most stringent environmental standards, much higher than the standards traditionally found in neighbouring countries in terms of water and air quality, etc. Government encouragement of qualified investors. Land concessions were offered initially to get the industry started to a small number of qualified nucleus investors. One of those nucleus investors, incidentally, was Britain's Commonwealth Development Corporation, who were very keen to start an investment in the Philippines, but were chased out by NGO pressure to the minister in the British government saying, why is the British government investing in oil palms in Philippines? This is a terrible industry. We don't want plantations in Philippines. And the minister pulled the plug on that project. That was 40 years ago. However, It worked very successfully in Thailand. The third one is policies to encourage small farmers. Protection, just a few. Protections from imports, encouragement of the nucleus investors, as I mentioned, access to rural finance. So look what has happened now in Thailand. More than 300,000 smallholder families in an extremely sustainable industry. They have done it by themselves. Macro policies are important. Micro policies just restrict people. Where are we? Thailand's growers' response to these incentives. This is where we talk about the 4 pillars of sustainable palm oil production in Thailand: advances in science, environmental best practice, development of sustainable markets, finally, and most importantly, social sustainability. Now, I cannot speak to you much about this, but advances in science obviously involve oil palm breeding for drought-tolerant seeds. This has been very successful in Thailand, and it has enabled Thailand to compete. It takes a long time. If you look at this graph, over the past 50 years, 1975 plantings in Thailand, commercial plantings, were getting 46 tonnes of fruit per hectare. By 2005, this had grown to 89 tonnes of fruit per hectare. This is what the industry, including the smallholders, have achieved. And the benefits of this sort of planting material is now exported all around the world. So it's not just helping Thailand small growers, but it's also helping growers in other areas where there's dry climate. Thailand small farmers are planting millions of drought-tolerant hybrid seeds each year. Tissue culture has been an important part of this program in Thailand. Cloning the elite palms from the breeding programs. These are now producing their own seeds, clonal seeds, which are benefiting Thailand's growers as well as customers around the region who suffer from similar drought tolerance. Latest advance has been a Genomics Laboratory to further fine-tune this. Let me reassure you that we are not doing GMOs. We are just wanting to fingerprint and trace genetic markers in the material that we are using. Advances in agronomic science has been very important because small farmers face special dilemmas when they come for replanting, what to do. So in Thailand, growers have developed unique replanting systems, which we call avenue replanting, which you can read it there. It's all about improving their environmental and economic sustainability. Rather than go through the details of all this, if anyone's interested, these things have been written up in scientific journals. Maximizing lifetime yield for greater economic sustainability. Second pillar, briefly, environmental best practice. This has got a lot to do with recycling of waste, not burning it. It's very fashionable to burn empty fruit bunches. We're determined not to do that. In fact, there is a lot of work I'll talk about in a different paper. Composting, of course. Reducing chemical poisons for rat control in the plantations. This is not rocket science. It's something we learned from Malaysia and elsewhere. Introducing barn owls. And all our small farmers now are enabled to introduce barn owls to their plantations, hopefully too, to control their rats and reduce their chemicals. Perhaps the biggest step forward in environmental sustainability has been the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. This started a long time ago. I won't go into it because I think you're all fully aware of where the greenhouse gas emissions come from. In the mid-1970s, the industry in Thailand started building digesters, in-ground digesters, to capture the methane. As you can see here, we call them cigars, covered in-ground anaerobic reactors. And these capture the methane biogas, have a massive effect on the reduction of greenhouse gases. and can be used for generating renewable energy. This is now universal in Thailand. I would say nearly every crushing mill has got this. There was no coercion, there was no compulsion to do this. The industry, the farmers, the crushing mills did it because they saw incentives to do it and that it was a good thing to do. Incidentally, the surplus carbon credits generated under the scheme, the United Nations scheme, CERs. There's a warning here for those of us who are producing sustainability certificates. We can't sell these CERs anymore. 100,000, I have 100,000 tonnes of carbon CERs I would like to give away. The reason we can't sell them is because they're tainted with oil palm. They are said to come from the palm oil industry. Even the World Bank will not allow us to sell these CERs in their carbon auctions. There is such prejudice against this. So, I mean, the farmer's response has to be to, well, let's stop producing CERs. It's only natural, isn't it? However, we could say that despite the disappointments over CERs, these projects have been very successful. There's certainly been a large reduction in large greenhouse gas reductions. Renewable energy is replacing fossil fuels in the grids, coal in the grid. Wastewater treatment has improved. Factory efficiencies have improved. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, new skilled jobs have been created in 3 rural communities. Well, now more than 3, in 30 rural communities. All the people that you see in this picture, the engineers who manage the projects, the electricians, the chemists, they are all the mechanics, they are all local people. High quality jobs, which a generation ago they would never have dreamed to be able to get that sort of job in their hometown. This is one of the wonderful things about the palm oil industry, bringing quality employment to rural areas. Third pillar, development of sustainable markets. I won't say too much because a lot has been obviously said. Thailand exported its first certified sustainable palm oil in 2013. This is promoting economic sustainability for Thailand's small farmers, we thought. And we have developed a port on the west coast of Krabi in Thailand for exporting to India and to Europe. Not so much to Europe now because Europe doesn't want it, because there is so much prejudice against mass balance. There is so much prejudice against certificates. Green palm has gone. It's not surprising to me that it is so difficult to develop more smallholders. We are taking away the incentives.
Excuse me, John. John, can I have your attention? We need you to wrap up because we have to prepare the room for the General Assembly.
Thank you,
Darryl.
Daryl. Certainly, I will wrap it up. Finally, of course, there is the social sustainability. I think that you are all fully aware of the social sustainability, and you're all fully aware of this smallholder group, which was certified in 2012. This is Daryl when he was looking much younger. I might ask you, what has happened since 2012? Kun Yoksawin hit it right on the head. What have we been doing wrong? Such a disappointment, and so clear to some of what we have been doing wrong. Finally, I will wrap it up. Okay, second to last. In conclusion, Thailand's oil palm industry has brought dramatic improvement to previously impoverished rural communities. The fathers, the grandfathers of these farmers delivering their fruit were probably members of the communist insurgency. Now they have new prosperity, and hundreds of thousands of tourists are flocking into an area which was previously unsafe. But looking ahead 30 years, this is what is happening. Soaring global populations and rural poverty are creating pressure on land and food resources. We all know this. And Philippines is just an example for the world. It's happening in Africa and Latin America. My last slide. 4 key conclusions in our shared responsibility. The first one, as we have seen, given the right incentives, small farmers are able to develop a very sustainable industry. Less stick and more carrot. We will get there. The second one is the unintended consequences of well-intentioned social policies can be a barrier to oil palm development. This will have serious consequences for many societies and for the global environment. Philippines is just one example of this. As we can see from the population trends, not just in Philippines, but globally, the soaring demand for vegetable oils does not defy logic. We need an extra 5 million tonnes every year. It has to come from somewhere. And finally, we have a shared responsibility to address the reasons for the current global slowdown in new oil palm plantings before that slowdown results in more serious social and environmental problems. Thank you, and I apologise for overrunning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glendon.